begin with the standard verses that all Tibetans of all schools use at the beginning of every meditation session, every Dharma gathering. And if you don't know them, it means you're a little bit on the square side. You're a little bit behind the ball. Sangha Chodan Sokisha. Sangha. Sangha. Bado dane gyabsuji, dangi jinsoji pasonamgi, drola pencher sangha, drupar sho, samchan tamsha, dewa tan, dewa gyutan tambar gyurchi, dunga tan, dunga gyutan tawa gyurchi, dunga mewa dewa tamito. Yiran charan yila nebe, tonyola nepar gyurchi. Lama sobawa shodo sarvadama, sobawa shodo hum. By invoking the three precious jewels, my Buddha mind, my wisdom power, and my dedication to enlightenment, I cultivate the six paramita to quickly achieve enlightenment and for the benefit of all living beings. May all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they have joy which doesn't lead to disaster. And may they have equanimity for seemingly good beings and seemingly unpleasant beings. Om Sabo Ashoda Sabadama Sabo Ashoda Hong. All things pure from the beginning, pure in the nature of emptiness, pure in the nature of always resting in the space-like infinity of the essence of mind. And I mentioned that everyone should learn those two verses, because then if you go to a Dharma center, they immediately think you're an insider. You're someone in the know. You're not like a tin horn. It's like people who go to Tibet, the first thing I teach them is to say to any Chinese soldiers and police they meet, Ni hao, Shi she, howdy, thanks a lot. And with Tibetans, Tashi dile. And that someone is kind to you, tuti che, thanks a lot. Just a few things in those languages are kind of useful. I think is a kind of a showing the universality of all peoples. In the early days, because I've led groups to Tibet pretty well once a year through thick and thin for the last 35 years, several times Tibet's been under martial law and has been very strict. Other years it's very relaxed. But I always ask everyone to be kind and gracious and polite with any of the police or army or whatever, even in the very strict times, because all humans are humans just doing their job. It's like Democrats. You can't blame them for being Democrats. It's just the way they are. Or Republicans. You can't blame them for being Republican. It's just the way they are. You can say that in election season. And so we always try to be just as friendly with Chinese police and soldiers as with anyone else. And I think that's the meaning of the fourth of those lines, equanimity between good and bad. When we're rough to rough people, it just makes them rougher. So it's like Christ said, love your enemies and be good to those who harm you. A line he borrowed from us Buddhists, and the Christians still aren't paying royalty. So we covered some of bodhicitta between the Thursday night talk and what we spoke about last night, and the quote from Milarepa, where this becomes the foundation. Bodhicitta is used as the foundation of all Buddhist practice. Often we say, when we divide the teachings of Buddha into two, we make two levels, the first of those being everything you do with the effort to benefit yourself. In other words, achieve inner freedom, inner stability, inner quality, a sort of a based on your own sense of your own problems and your own suffering, your own unhappiness, to solve your own problems and get an inner level of inner clarity and inner stability. Sometimes we call that the Hinayana level of training, which in this sense means the simplification of your life and clarification and stabilization of your inner life. And the other, Mahayana, which puts the whole thing rather in the Four Noble Truths, suffering causes suffering, liberation, path to liberation, rather than put it in terms of one's own personal suffering and personal causes of suffering, personal liberation, personal paths to personal liberation. Puts the focus on all living beings and compassion as the basis, the driving force of the meditation, of the training or of the practice. And when it has compassion on that basis, whether it's Sri Lanka or Buddha or Burma or Tibet or China, Japan, if it has universal compassion, then as the driving force, then it becomes Mahayana. Without that, it is not Mahayana. So Tantra is often said to be an ornament of Mahayana, and the Six Yogas are part of that. Therefore, part of that extension of that great compassion. For that reason, many Tantric sadhanas for practice begin with the words, Maya, now I'm engaging in Vajra in order to achieve enlightenment more quickly, Nirtu Nirwa. In order to achieve enlightenment more quickly, I engage in Vajra Yogini practice, or I engage in Chakrasambhara practice. And in other words, more quickly for the benefit of others. So Tantra is seen in that way as an ornament. So often when we're doing the first level of training, we sort of try to become more aware of the stress and the anxieties and the difficulties in our own life, and look at these in terms of cause and effect. The so-called Four Noble Truths, cause, suffering the cause, or unhappiness the cause, and liberation and the path, the way to liberation. In Mahayana, there's more of an emphasis to look at the universal perspective. And we can't do Mahayana without some stability in that first level. Yeah, so Tantra becomes an extension of Mahayana. Mahayana meaning our awareness being focused a little bit more on the universal suffering, and on our role, not just in our own liberation, our own upliftment, but in the upliftment of the world. I think this is a little bit more, because there's a little bit more to do with, in terms of the two levels of reality, the two sides of the way we experience everything. The level of interconnectedness, how we are interconnected to all things. So naturally, whatever we do for self will benefit others. Whatever we do with a good heart to benefit self will have some benefits to others. The emphasis on universal compassion rather than the personal liberation, Like the idea is that when we achieve deeper levels of meditation, this universalism tends to prevent us from getting distracted from the bliss and joy of meditation and the sort of symptomatic side effects of meditation. Gampopa puts it like this in his Lam Rim Tarkyan, Rinpoche Tarkyan, Jewel Ornament of Liberation. That if we don't use universal situation as our awareness platform, when our samadhi achieves a certain level, we just sort of get stuck. And then eventually someone has to come along and tap us on the shoulder and say, revive, wake up, and go on to Samyak Sambodhi, the great universal enlightenment. So that statement's made by Gampopa. And for that reason, Tantra is said to be an extension of Mahayana. Often, all Tibetan schools say you can practice Tantra on the basis of either mind only or Madhyamaka. In other words, the one mind, all things are just mind, that lineage of Chittamatra coming from Asanga, or the Madhyamaka coming from Nagarjuna. Being in the middle, resting in the middle between being and non-being. I think Thursday evening I gave the example from the Chud tradition, which is, because Chud is based on Chakra Samvara and He Vajra. It's a passage in the He Vajra, which gives us 4 pointers for how to live moment by moment in terms of being in the middle. And the first of those is to walk like a tiger. A tiger is fearless, so we should always have a quality of fearlessness. And fearless, not in the sense of bravado, but basic self-confidence. And a tiger always looks kind of happy-go-lucky look about it. Walk like a tiger, be fearless, but not in the sense of bravado. Like Buddha says in a sutra, the one who fears when there is no need to fear is a fool, and the one who does not fear when there is a danger of something to be afraid of is also a fool. So not in the sense of that. A tiger is confident and brave. And that confidence and brave makes it fearless in the face of its own life destiny. And it's also used for the male energy of great bliss. In Tantric Buddhism we say your male quality inherited from your male ancestors is rowdyism. You look like a rowdy bunch. You're very rowdy today, Eric. A kind of a bliss factor. And this we associate with the male quality inherited from our male ancestors. Like a tiger always looks kind of very pleased with its life. Like dogs, it's like they're down there like not necessarily looking so pleased with their lives. They're more pleased with their master, I think. Winston Churchill says, I don't like dogs, they look up at you. I don't like cats, they look down at you. Only the pig sees a man as an equal. So he kept pigs as pets and read his speeches to them. I don't think tigers look either up or down to us, but as a big cat, they also kind of look upon us as a potential tasty morsel. Although I think generally they think of us as too salty, so they have to be very desperate to go in for such salty food. And the bliss factor, I think bliss here is associated with aggression. The doingness or you could say, exerting our will on the universe. Like, I want to prune that tree. The tree is actually quite happy without pruning, and when it sees you coming with the shears, it's going, yikes. Here comes that terrible guy with the scissors who's going to cut off some of my lung veins. But of course, sometimes our doingness is also planting trees and so on. So the bliss factor, the bliss of doingness, you could say. Sanskrit, upaya, or tab. I think Roshi Zen Halifax, one of the first qualified Western female Zen teachers, she calls her center the upaya center. The doingness, often translated as method. Sometimes translated as tabkye, wise and skillful means. But the bliss or joy from doing, that's considered to be our kind of male inheritance from male ancestors. And from the second image is of the seated yogini seated in meditation, inherited from our female ancestors. The ability to perceive, experience, and sympathetically understand or embrace things. This sympathetic embracing of whatever occurs. So it's said when our male side becomes too strong, we become busybodies and drive our boyfriends or girlfriends or spouses or parents or kids bananas because we're always overdoing. When our female element overrides, then we err a little bit on the side of simply appreciating the isness of being. One is like if you're a bachelor living alone and your house is, and your male side is too dominant, your house is overly clean. And if your female side of dominant, it's just you appreciate the art of leaving your dirty socks wherever they fell. So both in balance is required. If you're female, then being overly organized. And if the male side dominates, if the female dominates, then again, a little bit underly organized, you could say. So the third image, so this is often called the wisdom factor in the Buddhist prajna, The first is associated with upaya, and the second with prajna. How we engage the world and how we experience or absorb the world. These two are used, I think, because in some Asian languages, like Tibetan word for man is the protruders. And the Tibetan word for female is pume, the protruderless. Without protrusion, without the protrusion. And so, if one isn't sure which one is, one has to look. And so the protrusion is like pressing one's own. That aspect of oneself is pressing one's own druthers, so to speak, on the world. And the non-protruder aspect of one's being, the feminine side of one's being, is taking the world as it comes in a sympathetic, understanding way, embracing it fully and understanding it fully. The third is like the coiled snake, to be like a coiled cobra. And in the Buddhist tradition, the Indian tradition, the snake has nothing to do with Adam and Eve and the apple and the fig leaves, but rather it's a sacred animal. And the sacredness of the snake is that it sits on its tail and coils up like this and sits between the two levels of reality, the male and the female. So if we go to Nagarjuna's way of doing this from Madhyamaka and using sutra language, the female, the infinity of being, or shunya, shunyata, and the male being the appearance, what we experience within that background of infinity. So like the coiled snake dancing between these two, finding the perfect center point where infinity of being and the finiteness of the present moment can be perfectly experienced. For that reason, I think if we look at many of the highest yoga tantra beings, they'll have a cobra around their neck, or I think Yamantaka has 8 great snakes around his, representing the 8 Naga spirits, or the 8 harmony with nature. You could say harmony with nature spirits. And without much effort, effortlessly, the snake sort of sways like this as it's standing up on its tail, and keeping perfect attunement to the infinity of being and the finite nature of being. Whoops, I got that wrong. The infinity of being and the finite nature of being. The infinity of being, the finite nature. Emptiness, appearance. Tangchok, nangchok. The Dalai Lama often says in order to practice Tantra well, a person needs to have a basic understanding of the nature of the emptiness reality, the reality of emptiness, or the shunya. Now sometimes in English they say the shunya doctrine, but doctrine to us means like something written out, doesn't it? It's like a manifesto. But here, Temba doesn't mean like a manifesto, but the thing which actually shows itself. In other words, the reality, emptiness as an existential reality. In other words, emptiness as the deeper nature of all things, our mind and all phenomena. So this coiled snake, sort of leaning to the left, attunes to the emptiness reality. Leaning to the right, attunes to the something's happening. But you don't know what it is. Do you, Mr. So this is a little bit like what is termed in the Uttara Tantra, one of the Shastras by Asanga, as termed the non-abiding nirvana of the bodhisattva. With the wisdom of emptiness, he or she rests the mind in nirvana. Out of great compassion, he or she rests, keeps one foot in samsara. So non-abiding, out of emptiness, abides in nirvana. Out of great compassion, abides in samsara. So keeps one foot in both dimensions, one foot in both worlds, if you will. That's why the expression that we sometimes see in Buddhism, there's a great emphasis on the world is an evil place and a place of suffering, and going beyond the world. The world, not understood deeply, is a place of great suffering. The world, properly understood, is a world of great bliss. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, which I think is the greatest Buddhist sutra and one of the greatest works of human literature throughout the ages. I was going to say epochs, but I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Epochs. Now the Avatamsaka Sutra is the first sutra that Buddha taught. So we want to talk about early Buddhism. We have to talk about the Avatamsaka. Because it said after Buddha's enlightenment, for 21 days, he only spoke the Avatamsaka Sutra. And not a single person could understand. So he said, oh my gosh, these humans, what to do? I guess I can't teach the highest teaching. I'm going to really have to go back to like square zero and start again. So we went all the way back and taught the lowest possible way of talking about enlightenment. And then gradually worked up to the highest. The Tendai school of Chinese Buddhism tells Buddhist history in that way. For 21 days. And in the Avatamsaka Sutra, Buddha says, whatever situation a Buddha is in, that Buddha only sees paradise, only sees bliss, only sees happiness. How so? Because whether people experience bliss and happiness has not that much to do with the actual world they are in. It's got to do with the manner in which people see that world. Take Chicago, for example. It's one of the most beautiful cities on the planet. It has an ideal climate of 4 seasons, beautiful brisk winters to bring out the throb of your heart, and it's got beautiful springs with flowers blossoming and rich summers with music festivals in, what is it called, Grant Park? Wonderful autumns with foliage and all of that. And some people will come to Chicago and say, oh my God, what terrible weather. It's cold in the winter, muddy in the spring, too hot in the summer, and rectum apertures out shooting guns at animals in the autumn. Where I grew up, the late local First Nations people were, Micmacs, were largely put together with the Iroquois. So when the Iroquois, a lot of the native North Americans from upper New York and those areas were picked up in the 1880s and so forth and shipped down, I think it was 1880s, I could have the decade wrong, but that general period, and shipped down to Florida. A bunch of our Micmacs were grouped together with them and shipped down to Florida. And little did we know that Florida was later to become seen as a retirement paradise. So as Buddha would say, if you have Buddha eyes, Florida is a beautiful place. And our Micmacs from East Canada and the Iroquois nations from the New York and that area were basically given prime beachfront property with their own alligator soup recipes. So the Avatamsaka Sutra makes this point that when you have eyes of joy, the world looks joyful. When you have paradisical eyes, the world looks paradisical. When you have angry eyes, the world looks angry. When you have greedy eyes, the world looks greedy. And when you have fearful eyes, the world looks scary, and so on and so forth. And there, this idea of a Buddha keeps one foot in nirvana and one foot in samsara. Because of the one foot in nirvana, the foot in samsara experiences none of the normal, what we think of as negative conditions associated with samsara, like dukkha, like suffering and so forth, like anger and conflict and fighting and all of these. And because of the one foot in nirvana, is able to experience the world in a completely embracing manner. So this coiled snake has that kind of a meaning, either from the Nagarjuna side of infinity, finite, or the Avatamsaka side, nirvana, samsara, nirvana, nirvana, samsara, nirvana, with the snake dance. Or from highest yoga tantra language, great bliss, timeless wisdom, great bliss, timeless wisdom, great bliss, timeless wisdom. So like the tiger, walking tiger, the seated yogini, the coiled snake, and finally the dancing dakini, again a female quality. Dancing dakini, dancing angelette, you could say. That everything one does in the world, because of one foot in nirvana, can be done with complete freedom, inhibition, and no distortion. But because of the somethingness of being, the samsara nature of being, can be done with complete bliss. So on the one hand, the dance of great bliss infinity, great bliss, wisdom of immortal wisdom. As in this painting, it's from a practice coming from the Chakrasamvara and Hevajra Tantras, known as Chud. In the meditation, one visualizes that one's spirit leaves one's body and flies in the sky above and dances in circles around your dead corpse. And so it's the sort of the image of the dancing dakini. Chakrasamvara and Hevajra Tantra also have this statement that one should see, from the moment of conception, see your body as a corpse. Because we all have a death sentence. So we've got the ticket to that show in our pocket from the time we're conceived. See your mind as the bearer of that corpse. How do we bear our corpse? We bear our corpse like the walking tiger, like the seated yogini, like the coiled snake, and like the dancing yogini. So the dancing yogini, as we dance through our life, the dance is, the symbol is most thoroughly symbolized by Chakrasamvara and Hevajra, the so-called female tantras. And the tummo in Six Yogas of Naropa is based on those two tantras. As I often mentioned, another expression for that is rope lagi neljor, the yoga of being a playful god or goddess, rope lagi neljor. The dancing yogini represents everything that comes into our life. Now the yogini, being a female quality, is basically a wisdom presence, a wisdom aspect. The ability to experience things as they are without any crowding of them, if you will. I like to liken it to my grandma, my Irish grandma. Whenever it came time to cook a meal, even though she had recipe books, she usually didn't use them. She'd just open the pantry and walk around and look what was there and say, oh yes, and out would come whatever she chose to make. The yogini sort of represents that kind of wisdom, the dancing yogini. What's the American expression? If life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Something like that. With whatever is there, the yogini represents the ability to extract that, work with that in a joyful, celebratory, unintimidated manner. So these four, you could say, are the basis of the Six Yogas of Naropa, because the Six Yogas of Naropa is based on the tummo section is considered foundation stone, and although there's 5 different tantras interwoven in the practice, the tummo is the foundation stone. Walking like a tiger, seated in infinite emptiness like a yogini, coiled like a snake, and dancing like a dakini. And the other thing I wanted to discuss this morning, when we go through the preliminaries, yesterday we mentioned the general sutra ones. Often in the tantras they talk about ngundro, or preliminaries, referring to the tantric preliminaries. And we can or cannot do those. It's up to our discussion with our own Sawe Lama, as it's called. But often Kagyu schools, they like to do 100,000 often of 5 prostrations and refuge, with Guru Mantra and Bodhicitta, mandala offering, Vajrasattva. They often do 100,000 of each of those. That's kind of a new Tibetan tradition. It's not so old. It doesn't seem that existed that long ago. And there's no mention of it in earlier texts. Only in later texts, the last 100, 150 years, has it become a popular idea, the 100,000s. And reality is people do a little bit of each one, how much, in consultation with their own teachers. So sometimes some people will be told do 500,000 prostrations because you're a lazy person and you really need to pick up your act. And other times people say, oh no, don't do any prostrations, you're already some sort of weird health nut jogging 5 miles a day and eating nothing but seaweed and what's that terrible spinach look-alike? What? Kale, yes. No prostrations for you. All that negative karma of destroying all that kale, depleting the sea of seaweed. You better do 500,000 Vajrasattvas for makeup, purify that negative karma off. So in the older traditions, till 150 or so years ago, it was more common that one would do whatever was thought would be useful. Actually, Lama Tsongkhapa did 3,500,000 prostrations, which isn't that difficult to do once you get into it. When I was in Dharmsala in the early days, when I was in my mid-20s, when you get used to doing prostrations, you can do about 1,000 in a session. So if you do 2,000 in 2 sessions a day, you can do 2,000. It's only 50 days to bang out 100,000. It's not much at all. Before you know it, you're up to 3,500,000 with the passage of days. But Tsongkhapa did add a little bit of a extra challenge to it. And that when he didn't eat ordinary food. He only ate juniper berries, which is a kind of a super fuel. Apparently they're slightly poisonous. Mm-hmm. But with those ngundro, often they'll do them sort of in a kind of a general way. And some people will do them in retreat. So it's common Tibetans will go to, say, Mount Kailash. And there's a place in Mount Kailash which you have a perfect view of the mountain. And it's said Maitreya Buddha manifests there every year on the full moon of the 4th month. So a lot of Tibetans will go there on the 3rd month and will do their 100,000 prostrations and finish the day before and say hello to Maitreya when he manifests. If the coronavirus is strong at that time, they won't shake hands, they'll just bow. Then they do the 3-day walk around the mountain in 1 day. Because once you've done 100,000 prostrations at 16,000 feet, you can walk faster than you normally would walk at 16 or 17 or 18, because the pass is 18,600 feet. Otherwise, these days in India, Tibetans love to go to Bodh Gaya for a couple of months in the winter, and they'll do their 100,000 there. The other very popular place is in Nepal at Bodhanath. So they'll bring a special board and put it in some little nook and cranny around the Bodha Stupa, do their 100,000 like that. But in olden days, not many people counted. You would just do a few prostrations in the beginning, and then you do those various ones to your own kind of pacing. And the other, before doing the tummo, that one practices or learns to do, known as generation stage or the sadhana practice. And I think for our purpose here, that's the most important. But if you do chakra samvara already, that suffices. Or if you do but any of the Vajrayoginis, the 16, so-called 16 Vajrayoginis, and each school of Tibetan Buddhism sort of has their favorites, various aspects of the Dakini. The important thing with those sadhanas is getting a sense of the three-dimensional nature of one's life. To develop a kind of a timeless or continual or sustained sense of the three dimensions of one's being. In put in a simpler way, it's learning to blend the three dimensions of one's being with the three kayas of a Buddha. So it's called in Tibetan kusum lam kir, carrying the three kayas into the path. When someone achieves enlightenment, the first thing that happens is the mind goes, wow, enlightenment. And one experiences the infinite mind, the experience of the infinite mind. This infinite mind in Buddhism is simply called Dharmakaya. The reality body, the Dharma body, the Dharma dimension, the truth dimension, reality, ultimate reality dimension, beyond form and so forth. And then out of that, one emanates, because of having used universal compassion as a meditative tool throughout one's practice, after one achieves that Dharmakaya experience, one does not simply rest on one's laurels and get lost in solitary nirvana, as is termed in some of the texts, or get stuck in solitary nirvana, but notices the great celebration of life in the 10 directions. And so, noticing that, the world of form comes back into play. When that world of form comes back into play, it's like thought and emotion. Thought as radiance, and emotion as bliss, bliss and radiance. And then thirdly, with mind in the infinity of being, thought and emotion in radiance and bliss, one decides, I think I'll put on some bacon and eggs and have breakfast. Or, in this case, tofu and kale. And have breakfast. And that's coming back into the world of physical activity. The essence of generation stage practice, or first stage Tantra practice, with everything one does, is learning to rest the essence of one's spirit in the formless realm of clear light Dharmakaya. Learning to emanate out of this timeless, formless state into the world of thought and emotion, which are subtle form, you could say, the world of subtle form, with radiance and bliss. And coming out of subtle form into ordinary embodiment, then coming out with joyful, creative energy, or playful deity yoga, as it's called, playful deity yoga. So we'll look at the sadhana sometimes later, and often the tummo and Six Yogas practice is done on the basis of that sadhana. So first you begin your practice with the verses of refuge and bodhicitta to satisfy the general Buddhist, you could say, general Buddhist and special Mahayana precept. Or I don't know, samaya perhaps is a better word than precept. And then the world dissolves into light, into your body, and you into light. And you touch to your Dharmakaya nature and your formless nature. Then in He Vajra Tantra, you come out of that as a swirling drop, just like at the time of conception, falling out of clear light into the timeless drop, the Mishikbe Tigli, the undying drop. White mixed with lead. No, lead? Red. You see, I'm spending too much time in Korea. There's one letter for both R and L. So over there they call me Lama Glenn. Lama Glenn. Sounds like a name of a good pop song, huh? Rama. Just call me Rama. And the white representing the primordial sort of maleness of one's being, and the red, the primordial femaleness of one's being. And those two together, one's sense of continuity, if you will, in the world of form. When we go in the world of formlessness, there's no center and there's no outside. There's no periphery. When you look at a vast sheet of white and it's this close to your face, like a white bed sheet or a white piece of paper, you have to put a center based on where you are, your nose or something like that. But if you forget self, and self disappears, it's just infinite radiance. Dharmakaya here is like that. So the real key to success in generation stage Tantra isn't sitting on your meditation seat and chanting a sadhana or chanting mantras, but it's the ability to touch, to carry clear light mind, your ordinary experience of clear light mind, into your everyday, every minute experience. And when you come out of that, coming out with the emotion of bliss and thoughts as radiance. And then whatever expression you do in the world is done on the basis of infinite radiance combined with radiant thought and radiant emotion. And that's called carrying Nirmanakaya. Now in the sadhana, the first part is often called taking the clear light of death as Dharmakaya, because we die between each thought moment, so we have that radiant infinity between each thought moment. We have it at the moment of going to sleep, the clear light of Mayas, deep clear light of the moment of sleep, and we have it just before dying, the clear light of the moment of death. And if we learn to practice tummo correctly, then in our tummo session we'll be able to generate it as a meditative experience, you could say. So taking those experiences as the path of Dharmakaya. In other words, path in Buddhism often means realization. In other words, being able to maintain your awareness of your own Dharmakaya nature in all circumstances. People who get lost in the ups and downs of humdrumness life is because they lose touch with their own Dharmakaya nature, and they lose touch with the bliss and radiance of their Sambhogakaya nature. So those three become the essence of the path, taking the three occasions as the three kayas. Then out of that one, in the sadhana, one arises as a tantric deity, He Vajra here being He Vajra as a tantric deity in union with the consort, Naratmaya. And that's doing all activity with great wisdom and great bliss. Naratmaya here literally means dakmema in Tibetan, means non-ego, non-self. In other words, having, as Nirmanakaya, as active in the world, having He Vajra, a great diamond energy, He Vajra, together with Naratmaya, beyond sense of self and others, symbolized by the dancing dakini. On that basis, on meditation cushion, one does a little bit of mantra to kind of shower the world with blissful three kaya seeds, I suppose you would say. And then when you get up from your meditation cushion and you walk around and do what you're doing, you've already showered the world with these kind of great bliss, joyful enlightenment energy seeds. And you go out and, if you're a janitor in school, go sweeping up, and all the kids are little emanations of dakas and dakinis, delighted to see you doing the dance with the broom. Sangye chotan soki shonam la janjo bardu dani kyamtsu chi dangi jinzo ji personam gi drola penjer sangye drupar sho sangye chotan soki shonam la janjo dani kyamtsu chi dangi ji personam gi drola penjer Sangye chodan soki shonam la shenju bardu dani kyamsu chi dangi jinsao jipa sonam gi drola pincher sangha drupar sho amasoba wa shodo sava dhamma soba wa shodo ham. So to practice tummo, I was just reading from the heart of Shinrazi, the Dalai Lama's on Tantra, in his commentary to the Six Yogas of Niguma. Niguma was Naropa's sister, and her tummo teaching is very similar to her brother's teaching, Naropa's teaching. And many Tibetan historians think that she received them from Naropa. Her short biography just says she received them from Vajradhara, which means Buddha. But that doesn't mean it wasn't Naropa. Like, for instance, the Dalai Lama's nickname is Vajradhara. When he went to Mongolia and became the guru of the Mongols in 1578, Atan Khan issued a proclamation saying, henceforth, Dalai Vajradhara is the guru of all Mongols. And so Vajradhara there isn't just a name used in a way for one's own guru. Anyway, whether it's Naropa or not is not of issue to me here, and so I'll just read from what he says in the lineage from her. And the same thing is said in the other, but I only read from this one because it's sitting in front of me. And the other is underneath the other ones, and I'd have to find the passage. So the main difference is that in the Niguma system, 2 preliminary practices are done as a tummo, as a general practice, rather than as a specialized practice. So the specialized practice, the foundation is pretty well identical to the Naropa system, the system coming from Tilopa and Naropa to Marpa. But going to Niguma goes to Tibet in a different way. Sitting in the correct posture, visualize the 3 channels and 4 energy points. The mantric syllables ah and hum. Through the blazing and falling, one becomes adorned instantly by the 4 joys. In other words, the purpose of tummo is to arouse great states of inner ecstasy or inner joy based on the great pleasure that one experiences from tummo practice. And that this, the body in a state of great bliss acts as a superior vehicle for deeper meditation or accelerated meditation, accelerated enlightenment. The meaning is something like that. Then by union with a special tantric wisdom, one experiences of samsaric and non-samsaric joys of 4 types. Through causing the moon-like energies to descend, reversing their flow, and blending the vital energies, one becomes adorned by non-samsaric awareness or wisdom. In other words, by bringing rising the female element, the male element is caused to descend and come down to the base of the chakras. And then drawing back up gives rise to these special states of consciousness that act as the platform, a higher platform for meditation. So here meditation really means a kind of a Mahamudra absorption or a Mahamudra samadhi. And we'll see more later in this sort of weekend workshop when we talk about Mahamudra. But basically, Mahamudra practice in one of the 3 ways, Sutra way, general way, or ordinary mind Mahamudra, which is more or less the same as Dzogchen. And then Tantric Mahamudra, which is practice on the basis of the 4 blisses. It goes on to say, the method of implementing the instruction under 2 headings, a path of relying on one's own body and the path of relying upon the body of another. In other words, the way you practice if you're just with yourself, and if you're in a romantic relationship and you practice in union with your partner. And I think that aspect is not very much stressed in the West because a lot of the peoples coming and teaching in the West are monks, and so they tend to teach a kind of a somewhat more celibatized aspect of the practice. But relying upon the body of another, very often in India and amongst the tantric practitioners, Central Asia, their practice was a partnership practice. In other words, they were either married or in partner relations, you could say. And so then the practice was done in union, because otherwise if you're going to spend all that time on it, you might as well kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? Except in Buddhism we don't kill the birds. We just shoot them with cameras. And then he goes on, the path of relying upon one's own body. In other words, how you do it as a solitary practitioner. And mostly, I think, in the group retreats in Tibet, they mostly did it that way, because the group retreats were usually either all male or all female. They didn't very often have co-ed retreats. One reason for that is the guys always end up fighting with each other, because men only fight over 2 issues, women and money. Is that true?
No.
What?
Food.
I don't know. So I don't remember ever being in a Denny's and 2 guys saying, we should have ham and eggs, and the other guy saying, no, it's going to be vegetarian, and then we're going to have to settle this outside. Yeah, I don't remember it ever being, we'll settle this outside. And then she goes, then in the Naguma system, they go on to explain it in the various ways. But basically, exactly the same as in the Naropa system, where we have 4 energy channels and 4 energy centers as the main body of the practice, and the 3 energy channels, just as in the illustration. And this illustration is kind of okay. It's out of one of my books on the 6 yogas, and so it's made by a Tibetan artist, a Western artist who lives in Toronto, who trained studied art and also studied Buddhism in Nepal for many years, and married a Tibetan lass and moved to Toronto. And so he did the illustrations for several of my books. So that's a kind of a rough kind of look at it. I think the way it's visualized is the channels aren't quite so far from, the side channels aren't quite so far from the central channel. In the Naropa system and in the Nguma system both, one usually does the generation stage first. In other words, you do the little sadhana, going into emptiness and coming out as Sambhogakaya drop with He Vajra or Chakra Samvara. If you do Yamantaka, you come out as Manjusri, as wisdom Sambhogakaya form. And then transforming, taking rebirth as the main deity, in this case in Yamantaka, then Yamantaka, and He Vajra as He Vajra with Naratmaya. In other words, you see your body as Haruka body. And we have a, where is that? Did you put that on a board somewhere?
The Haruka?
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, we have to reverse it. But here, when we do it as 6 yogas rather than dancing in that kind of manner, seated in meditation, and rather with multiple arms and so on, just with 2 arms and so on. So you do the sadhana coming like this, and you do it up until before the mantras. In other words, you just do the sadhana in generating the 3 kayas. As yourself as 3 kayas. Mind as Dharmakaya, thoughts and emotions as Sambhogakaya, and body as He Vajra and consort. And usually after that you'll stop for a little while and just focus upon the central part of your body like this, and develop a bit of mental focus, strengthen your attention span, so to speak. Maybe 5 minutes or something like that. And in that, this is a kind of a complicated painting where it doesn't really give much of an idea, but just imagine yourself as kind of a sort of a dark blue guy with a slightly whiter blue gal. So this was Marpa's main yidam practice, or main generation stage practice. And the 6 yogas, of course, were his main completion stage practice. And so then after seeing your body the center like this, you focus, and we just hold it there for about 5 minutes. And then we'll relax that sense. And one of the Tsongkhapa's commentary to it says that when you see in that way, just mostly start with the face, the hands, the heart. Often they put a white Om, red Ah, blue Hung. Blue Hung representing your Dharmakaya nature, red Ah your Sambhogakaya nature, white Om as your Namanakaya nature. And so we don't have to have much detail of it. You can just sort of see yourself as seated like that, male, female in union, with your body dark blue. And the consort is exactly the same dark blue, but you can't do that in a painting or it doesn't work very well. It's like painting black on black. Now here, He Vajra has 16 arms, and that's to represent these 16 emptinesses. So those of you who practice Yamantaka dances on 16 legs. This is to represent the 16 emptinesses. So the meaning is much the same. And Yamantaka, as he dances on this with 16 legs, he dances on 8 kinds of gods and 8 kinds of animals. And that's to represent the accomplishment of ordinary and extraordinary spiritual realizations. So in this same way, He Vajra just holds 8 skull cups, human skull cups, upside down, and in 8 of them are animals, and in 8 of them are deities. Again, to represent the, you could say, samsara, success in samsara and success in nirvana. Something like that. But we don't have to try to do much of a visualization of that kind. Just sort of get the center of the body with the eyes and the face and the dakini, and it's really just to and the Om Ah Hung, I think white Om, red Ah, blue Hung. You can either do them in Sanskrit or Tibetan or English. And putting the mind like that on a solid form without moving for 5 minutes before you do your practice is sort of a common way to start your tummo practice. So let's do that for about 5 minutes. And then on the basis of this stabilized mind, with our body as either chakra samvara and consort and in simple form, or hivajra and consort in simple form, we'll do 7 of the vase breaths, vase breathing exercises. But as you know, in the Naropa system, we always do the 9-round lung selva, breathing in through the right and out through the left, and in through the left and out through the right. It's kind of a preparation for vase breath. So let's do those 9, and you sit up, and as we've done before, usually you put your hand out, snapping it out, sort of like you're throwing energy, decentralizing the energy, and then pulling the energy back in and going. And those of you who've done this retreat before, as you know, with this, it's breathing in male energy, moonlight, and like breathing all of the male energy of the whole universe. And breathing it in as deeply as you can. And as you do, it sort of revives all of your male energies. And as you breathe out, then it releases all of the sort of pent-up negative male energies you have, and any anger or fear of being damaged, and so on, fear of violence, fear of aggression of others, fear of tigers. And first with 3 with white, and then the other 3 with red, like sunlight or sunset. And this is as you breathe that in, it breathes in all the female energies of the whole universe. And this completely fills your body, completely fills your lungs, and as you breathe it out, it totally, and as it's in there, it totally revives all of your own feminine quality, your marcha, your red element as it's called, and any sort of negative pent-up female energies that are sort of blocked or not circulating properly. These are all similarly breathed out. So then 3rd with blue, male, female in energy, in balance, but somewhat, you could say, it's breathing in the totality of those. Nyime actually in Tibetan, which means not two. You're breathing in not two energies, meaning not separate energies. And of course the first male here is a little bit more associated with the sense of form and the sense of samsara, you could say. And the red the sense of wisdom and the sense of joy and space, the sense of beyond ordinary form. And the third is beyond both of those. So a little bit associated, one a little bit with body, one a little bit more with thought and emotion, and one a little bit more with sort of the recesses of the soul. So let's do those nine, okay? Them with the red. And then both together. And then with the lung selvas, with the airs or energies thus clarified and restored or rejuvenated in that way, we'll do 7 of the vase breathing methods, or lung bambachen in Tibetan, pranayam, meaning breathing in as deeply as we can through the nose, and then when it's completely filled, swallowing, pressing down with the abdomen, pulling up with the muscles of the pelvic floor, and holding the energies at the base of the spine in that way. Try and hold for about 30 to 45 seconds and then release slowly through the nose. And we'll just do that 7 times. Sometimes between breaths we have to build up our oxygen a little bit and take 1 or 2 breaths between the vase breath. But not doing so excessively is, I think, one of the points of the practice is sort of a streamlined use of the oxygen that's breathed in and held in that way is one of the points of the practice. And those of you who've done this before, as you know, with the second practice, we breathe in, and as we hold the breath, we twist the tummy 3 times this way and 3 times this way. So let's just do 3 breaths like that. So it's like your tummy is a basketball or a grapefruit, something like that. Breathe in and press down and pull up. And as you're holding, just use the tummy muscles to move it around, with trying not to move the shoulders of the backbone. And the next of these so-called yantras, we breathe in, press down, pull up, and then as we push down on the energies, we roll the tummy down and extend it out and down. Sort of a little bit like the laughing Buddha in a Chinese restaurant. And then snap it back up. Like we extend the tummy down and out and then snap it back up. And we'll just do those 3 before our lunch break. But at the end, it's good to kind of release the energies. And one way of doing that is going like this. Like you take your breath in. You can just do that 3 or 7 times. Often they hold their hands kind of like that and go. And usually after doing these yantra, as they're called, or trilkor movements, Tibetan trilkor literally means like magic wheels, because they all have certain kind of motions, and they're all done on the basis of the vase breath, and the vase, the middle of a vase is like a circle, and so it's like a wheel. So they're called like magic wheels or magic circles. The purpose of these doing in the solar plexus area is this is the seat of our ferocious woman, our Chandali or Kundalini power. And so the practice of tummo or inner fire is to ignite the inner fire or inner heat of the ferocious woman. And when we can direct that through the central channel, then we can give rise to these 4 states of bliss or 4 ecstasies. That word dewa used there is also, Angawa is also used for joys. Just they're likened to the 4 stages of Tantra. The first is the pleasure a man or a young man or young woman feel when they first exchange glances. It's like, wow. This kind of openness arises in the mind, and the world is a beautiful place. The world is a good place. And even if you're in the middle of a war zone, when that happens, just for a moment, the world is a beautiful place. The world is a good place. And you're very happy to be there and to be alive. And the second, in that romance side, when they're sort of talking and giggling and touching hands. Again, even if you're in the war zone, suddenly the world feels like a wonderful place. This sort of sense of a relaxed mind, a joyful mind, and both physically and mentally, the world feels in balance and in harmony. And the third, when the couple kiss, again, doesn't matter what's going on in that part of the world, immediately takes on a very pleasant character. And finally, when they make love. So these 4 blisses are likened to those 4 states of the romantic encounter. And when we do this kind of breathing exercise to stimulate the marcha, the red element in ourself, which is the physical base sustaining our state of consciousness, it's sort of preparing the foundation for the release of or the experience of these 4 blisses or 4 joys. So after the break, we'll go on to the next little bits of tummo that we can do. And after the tea break, I don't know, we'll have to see. Probably half of you by that time will already have achieved enlightenment, so we can just, I'll just send you home. No need for more. Thank you. Kyawadi nyarada kala dencho ngudrum nyane drova chikyum malopa te sala goparsho. Chanjo samcho rinpoche ma ke pana ke gurchi ke panyampa me pa yong. Kone kondu power show.